The Bates family is growing again. Zach and Whitney announce pregnancy. It was a peaceful Sunday morning in Tennessee, the kind of morning that carried the warmth of quiet family life. The Bates house, usually filled with laughter, footsteps, and the sounds of little voices running through the hallways, was still. The early sunlight slipped through the curtains, touching everything in soft golden light. The coffee mugs left on the table, the framed photos of smiling faces, and the gentle hum of a home built on love. Whitney Bates stood in the kitchen, staring out the window, lost in thought. Life had been full lately, between caring for the kids, helping Zach with his duties, and juggling her own business. There hadn't been much time to just breathe. Yet that morning felt different. Something quiet, something deep inside her, felt new. A feeling she couldn't name yet, but her heart could sense. She had been feeling off for days. A little more tired than usual, a little more emotional. At first, she blamed it on exhaustion, the endless cycle of motherhood, work, and responsibility. But then came the small moments she couldn't ignore. The way her heart fluttered when she smelled morning coffee. The way her body seemed to whisper that something was changing. She walked to the bathroom, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the small white test that had been waiting on the counter. Her reflection looked back at her, nervous, hopeful, unsure. The seconds that followed felt eternal. She closed her eyes, whispered a small prayer, and waited. When she opened them again, her breath caught in her throat. Her heart stopped for a moment. Then it started racing faster and faster, as the truth began to sink in. She covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes, and sat down slowly on the edge of the bathtub. Whitney Bates was pregnant again. For a few seconds she couldn't move. Her mind flooded with memories, the first time she held each of her children. The sleepless nights, the laughter, the chaos, the love. She thought of Zach, his strength, his tenderness, his way of always grounding her when life got too loud. And now they were going to be parents again. Tears fell quietly down her cheeks. Not tears of fear, but of gratitude, of awe. The world around her seemed to blur as she held the tiny test close to her heart. Another miracle. Another piece of their love. Outside, the sound of birds filled the air. The house remained silent, but in that silence, a new heartbeat had quietly begun. One that would soon change everything. Whitney sat in silence for a long time, her heart still racing. The little test lay beside her on the counter, two pink lines staring back at her, as if whispering, "It's real." She felt an ache in her chest, not from fear, but from the weight of joy she couldn't yet express. Zach was still outside, playing with the kids, their laughter echoing faintly through the open window. The sound made her eyes fill again, those tiny voices, their little feet running across the grass, unaware that their family was about to grow once more. She took a deep breath and looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection seemed different now. She wasn't just Whitney, the busy mom or the loving wife. She was a woman carrying another heartbeat, another story, another blessing. For a few minutes she simply stood there, hand over her stomach, whispering softly, "Thank you, God. Thank you for trusting me again." As the day went on, she tried to act normal, helping the kids with breakfast, folding laundry, tidying up the living room. But her mind couldn't stop wandering back to the moment she'd seen those lines. Every few minutes her eyes would drift toward the counter, just to make sure she hadn't imagined it. When Zach came inside, the sun had already climbed high. He looked tired but happy, his shirt slightly stained from grass and laughter. "The kids are wild today," he chuckled, grabbing a glass of water. Whitney smiled, but her hands trembled slightly as she wiped the table. There were so many things she wanted to say, but no words felt right. She watched him move across the room. The man who had been her anchor through every storm. The father who loved their children with his whole heart. How could she possibly put into words the miracle she was about to tell him? Finally, she took a deep breath and reached for something behind her, the small white test she had hidden beneath a napkin. Her heart pounded as she turned toward him. "Zach," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, sensing something in her tone. "Yeah? What's wrong?" She didn't answer right away. She simply walked over, her eyes glistening, and held out her trembling hand. The test rested there, glowing faintly in the afternoon light. For a moment Zach just stared, confused, silent, and then it hit him. His eyes widened, his lips parted, and all the air seemed to leave the room. "Whit," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "Are you?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks as she tried to smile through the emotion. Yes, she breathed. We're having another baby. Zach didn't speak. He just stepped forward, wrapping her in his arms, holding her as if he never wanted to let go. The two of them stood there. No words, no sound, just the steady rhythm of two hearts beating together, already making room for one more. Outside, the children's laughter echoed once again, and the world seemed to slow down. For Zach and Whitney Bates, that single moment, that quiet embrace, became one of the most powerful in their lives. It wasn't just about another baby. It was about faith, love, and the beauty of a family that keeps growing in ways they never expected. The next morning arrived quietly, with a soft rain falling outside the Bates home. The sky was gray, and the world seemed still. The kind of morning that feels sacred, calm, almost like it's holding a secret. Whitney woke early. She lay there for a moment, her hand resting gently on her stomach. Even though there was no visible sign yet, she could already feel the change. It wasn't physical, it was deeper than that. A quiet awareness that life had begun again, unseen but real, forming beneath her heart. Zach was still asleep beside her, his arm draped across her, his breathing steady. She smiled faintly, remembering his reaction the night before, the shock in his eyes melting into tears, the way he held her as if trying to protect both her and the tiny life inside her. That memory alone made her eyes fill again. She whispered softly to herself, "We're really doing this again." Down the hall, the soft sounds of little feet began, their children waking up one by one. Bradley's cheerful voice called out for breakfast, Casey was humming a song, and the house slowly filled with the ordinary music of family life. Whitney stood in the kitchen making pancakes, her heart racing with anticipation. She and Zach hadn't told the kids yet. They wanted it to be special, a moment their children would remember forever. When everyone was gathered around the table, Zach glanced at Whitney. She nodded gently, her smile trembling with emotion. The children giggled, unaware that something was about to change their lives forever. Zach began to speak softly, his voice calm but filled with warmth. As he talked about family, blessings, and love, Whitney's eyes never left their faces. The curious eyes, the innocent smiles, the same joy that once began with their own love story. And then, as he finally said the words, "Mommy and Daddy have a surprise," there was a moment of stillness. The kids looked at each other, confused and excited. When the truth sank in, their reactions were pure and unfiltered. Laughter, wide eyes, tiny hands clapping, and little voices shouting, "A baby! A baby!" The room filled with chaos and joy all at once. Casey ran to Whitney and hugged her tightly, her small voice muffled against her mother's chest. Bradley jumped into Zach's arms, already asking if it would be a boy or a girl. Whitney laughed through tears. She had imagined the moment in her head 100 times, but the real thing was far more beautiful. Every smile, every hug, every tear felt like a reminder that love always multiplies. It never runs out. Later that day, when the house had quieted again, Whitney sat by the window with her phone in hand. It was time to share the news with the rest of the Bates family. One by one, she typed out the message, her hands shaking, her heart full. It didn't take long for replies to start flooding in, joyful messages, voice notes filled with laughter, emojis, and tears. Gil and Kelly Jo's message came last. A simple line that made Whitney cry all over again. "Every new life is a gift. We're so proud of you both." The rain outside began to slow. Through the window, the clouds parted just enough to let a small beam of light fall across the room. Whitney leaned back against Zach, resting her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, whispering softly, "This is our miracle, Whit." In that quiet Tennessee afternoon, surrounded by the love they'd built and the dreams they'd yet to live, the Bates family felt whole again, standing at the edge of another beautiful beginning. A few days later, the Bates family home was filled with the familiar sound of cars pulling up the gravel driveway, doors opening and cheerful voices echoing across the yard. The family was gathering again, brothers, sisters, parents, and little ones, all coming together for what everyone thought was just another family lunch. But Zach and Whitney knew this day would be different. It wasn't just another meal. It was the moment they would finally share their secret in person. The news that another tiny Bates was on the way. Inside, the house was buzzing with energy. Kelly Jo was already moving from room to room, making sure everyone had a place to sit, her smile wide as always. Gil helped the little ones with their shoes, laughing as one of the toddlers ran off giggling with a sock in her hand. Whitney stood by the kitchen counter, her heart pounding faster than she wanted to admit. The smell of home-cooked food filled the air, mixed with the laughter and warmth that always followed this family wherever they went. She looked around the room. Faces she loved, people who had seen her grow not just as a wife or a mother, but as part of their family. Zach walked up behind her, gently squeezing her hand. Their eyes met. No words, just that shared look that said, "It's time." After lunch, when everyone gathered in the living room, children piled on couches, older siblings chatting quietly, and Kelly Jo sitting with her hands folded, Zach stood up. His voice carried a warmth that instantly drew everyone's attention. He talked first about family, about how quickly life moves, how blessed they all were to share so many seasons together, through weddings, births, and everything in between. Whitney sat beside him, her eyes glistening as she listened. And then, just as the room fell silent, Zach smiled and reached for Whitney's hand. There was a quiet pause, and then he said softly, "We have something special to share." The room froze. Every eye turned toward them. The children leaned forward. Even Kelly Jo's expression softened with curiosity. Whitney's voice trembled as she finally spoke, gentle, steady, filled with emotion. "We're expecting," she said. "Another baby." For a second there was silence. And then all at once the room erupted, gasps, laughter, tears, cheers. Kelly Jo covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks as Gil stood there speechless, his face glowing with pride. One by one the siblings surrounded them. Hugs, congratulations, and heartfelt words filling the room until it overflowed with joy. The older Bates girls hugged Whitney tightly, whispering prayers and sweet words. The younger kids ran around chanting, "Another baby! Another baby!" The air felt electric, not loud but alive, the kind of moment that stays in memory forever. In the corner, Kelly Jo reached out and took Whitney's hands in hers. Her voice shook as she said, "Every child you've brought into this world has made it brighter, Whit. God's really blessing you." Whitney couldn't stop crying. It wasn't just happiness, it was gratitude. Gratitude for the love surrounding her, for the faith that held this family together, and for the tiny heartbeat that had already brought them all closer than ever. As the evening light faded outside, the Bates home glowed from within. The kids played, the parents laughed, and the walls echoed with warmth, the sound of a family that kept growing, not just in number but in love. Later that night, when everyone had gone and the house grew quiet again, Zach and Whitney stood by the window, watching the last car drive away. Zach wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Look at that," he whispered. "All this love. And we get to add one more." Whitney smiled softly, her eyes on the stars outside. "Our family just keeps becoming more beautiful," she said. And in that simple truth, surrounded by peace, faith, and love, the night felt like a promise. A promise that the story of Zach and Whitney Bates was far from over. The morning of the first doctor's appointment arrived softly, with sunlight filtering through the curtains and the smell of fresh rain still lingering in the air. Whitney woke up before the alarm, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was it. The day she and Zach would hear their baby's heartbeat for the very first time. She lay there for a moment, her hand resting over her stomach, whispering a silent prayer. Each pregnancy had felt different, but this one felt sacred in a new way. Maybe it was because life had already given them so much to be thankful for, or maybe it was because she knew how precious and fragile every heartbeat truly was. Zach walked in quietly, already dressed, his smile soft and reassuring. "Ready?" he asked, and she nodded, though her eyes were already wet. They drove in silence most of the way, not from worry, but from the kind of quiet that only comes when two hearts are full. Outside the car window, the Tennessee countryside rolled past, green fields, barns, fences, and open skies. Whitney watched it all, her fingers laced with Zach's. Every mile brought them closer to a moment that would forever be etched in their hearts. When they reached the small clinic, the familiar smell of antiseptic and faint music filled the air. Whitney's hands trembled as she checked in, smiling politely at the nurse, though her nerves buzzed beneath the surface. Zach stayed close, his hand steady on her back, his calm presence grounding her completely. The waiting room felt longer than it really was. Every tick of the clock sounded like a heartbeat, slow, expectant. And then finally the nurse called her name. Inside the dimly lit ultrasound room, time seemed to slow. Whitney lay back as the technician prepared the monitor. The cold gel touched her skin, and she flinched slightly, gripping Zach's hand tighter. He smiled down at her, whispering softly, "You're okay. I'm right here." The monitor flickered to life. At first it was just static gray lines and faint shapes. But then suddenly the room filled with the softest, most miraculous sound, a heartbeat. Tiny, strong, steady. Whitney gasped, her eyes flying open as tears streamed down her face. Zach's hand went to his mouth, his own eyes shining with emotion. The sound filled every corner of the room, rhythmic, beautiful, alive. "That's your baby," the nurse said softly, smiling. Whitney couldn't stop crying. She laughed through the tears, her voice breaking. "It's real," she whispered. "That's our baby." Zach nodded, unable to speak. He just leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers, both of them trembling as they listened to that small, steady rhythm, the sound of new life, of hope, of love made tangible. For a long time, neither of them moved. They just watched the tiny flicker on the screen. A heartbeat smaller than a grain of rice, yet powerful enough to change everything. On their way home, the car was quiet again, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was full of the heartbeat they just heard, full of gratitude for what was growing inside her. Whitney held the ultrasound photo close to her chest the whole ride home. When they reached the house, their kids ran to the door, shouting their names, their laughter filling the air. Whitney knelt down, showing them the picture. The children's eyes widened, curious, amazed, as Zach explained that this little blur on the paper was their baby brother or sister. The house filled with cheers and hugs. Whitney felt her heart ache with joy. The photo passed from hand to hand, small fingers tracing the image as if they could already feel the baby's presence. That night, when the house was finally quiet, Whitney placed the ultrasound picture in a small frame beside her bed. The soft glow of the lamp fell across it, and she stared for a long time, smiling through her tears. So much had changed in just a few weeks. From a quiet morning filled with uncertainty to this, the sound of a heartbeat that would echo in their memories forever. And as she drifted to sleep that night, Whitney whispered a final thought, a promise, into the stillness. "Whatever happens, little one, you are already so loved." The weeks that followed felt like a beautiful blur. A season of soft anticipation, laughter, and quiet changes that slowly reshaped every part of the Bates household. The morning sickness came first. Gentle at times, stubborn at others. Whitney smiled through it all, though Zach could see the tiredness behind her eyes. He'd wake up early every morning, making breakfast before she even came downstairs, pancakes for the kids, toast and tea for her. He wasn't always perfect in the kitchen, but the effort meant everything. Some mornings, Whitney would find him sitting on the porch with their youngest on his lap, whispering, "Mommy's growing your baby brother or sister." Those small moments made her heart ache in the best way. The house itself began to change too. The older kids grew more protective, little helpers in every way. Bradley proudly took charge of reminding Whitney to rest, while Casey followed her everywhere, already talking about baby names. Even the youngest one seemed to sense something special was happening. Every corner of their home began to fill with little signs of new life. A folded blanket on the couch, a half-decorated nursery upstairs, ultrasound pictures taped to the refrigerator door. And yet, beneath all the laughter and planning, Whitney often found herself pausing, just standing still, hand over her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of the life within her. It wasn't always easy. There were days when fatigue set in, when emotions ran high, when fears whispered quietly in the back of her mind. But every time she felt uncertain, Zach was there, patient, steady, grounded. He'd hold her close and remind her, "We've done this before, Whit. God's got us again." Their nights became quieter, softer. Sometimes they'd sit outside after the kids went to bed, talking about everything. Their hopes, their worries, the names they liked, and the kind of world they wanted their children to grow up in. One evening, under a silver Tennessee sky, Whitney leaned her head against Zach's shoulder. The stars reflected in her eyes as she said softly, "You know, I didn't think my heart had room for more love, but somehow it always finds a way." Zach smiled, kissing her forehead. "That's what love does," he said. "It grows even when you think it can't." Inside, the nursery slowly came to life. The walls were painted a gentle shade of cream, sunlight dancing across them during the day. Whitney carefully folded tiny clothes, each one holding a dream of who this baby would become. She placed a small framed photo of their family above the crib, a reminder that no matter how big their family grew, love was the center of it all. As her belly grew, so did the excitement. Family members visited often, bringing food, gifts, advice, and laughter. Kelly Jo would gently touch Whitney's belly, tears in her eyes as she whispered blessings. The sisters would crowd around, taking pictures, teasing Zach for his overprotectiveness. The whole Bates family seemed to move in rhythm with Whitney's heartbeat, united in joy, in love, in faith. And yet, as beautiful as everything was, there were also quiet, reflective nights. Nights when Whitney couldn't sleep, lying awake and thinking about how quickly time was passing. She'd walk to the nursery in the dark, sit by the crib, and whisper softly to her unborn child, words filled with love and wonder. "Little one," she'd say, her voice trembling, "I don't know who you'll be yet, but I already love you more than I can explain." The wind outside would stir softly against the windows, the sound of rain sometimes tapping gently on the roof, and in those moments she felt peace. A peace that told her everything was exactly as it was meant to be. As the final weeks drew closer, the excitement in the house became almost electric. The kids would count down the days, their laughter echoing through the halls. Zach started keeping the car ready at all times, just in case. Every night ended the same way. Whitney sitting by the window, Zach's arms around her, the sound of their children's laughter fading into the background. They would talk about the day they first met, the life they had built, and how this new chapter felt like a blessing beyond measure. And as the moonlight poured softly through the glass, Whitney whispered the same quiet promise she had made months ago. "Whatever happens, this baby will grow up surrounded by love." That night, as she drifted to sleep, her hand resting over the small miracle within her, she knew their story was about to change again. And when it did, it would be even more beautiful than before. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a gentle glow across the Bates bedroom. Whitney woke with a strange mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. Today was the day. Her body ached in ways that spoke of life preparing to arrive, yet her heart was alight with joy. Zach stirred beside her, sensing immediately that something had changed. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange no words were necessary. They both knew, the moment they had dreamed of, prayed for, and waited for was finally here. The house, usually filled with the chaos of laughter and little footsteps, now felt quiet, as if it too was holding its breath. The older kids had been gently sent to a neighbor's home for the day, their excitement bubbling over in whispers and hugs the night before. Now only Zach and Whitney remained, waiting for the miracle to unfold. Whitney gripped Zach's hand, feeling his steady pulse beneath her fingers. Every contraction sent waves of both pain and anticipation through her body, yet with each one came the profound knowledge that they were moments away from meeting the newest member of their family. Time seemed suspended. The world outside the Bates home went on, oblivious to the small, sacred drama unfolding within. Zach whispered words of encouragement, his voice calm, soft, and filled with unwavering love. "You've got this," he said. "I'm right here. We're right here." Hours passed, measured in breaths, contractions, and whispered prayers. The rhythm of life had narrowed to this single point. Whitney's focus on the miracle growing inside her, Zach's unwavering support, and the love that had always bound them together. Finally, as the sun reached its peak, the moment arrived. The room was quiet except for the labored breathing, the soft sounds of encouragement, and then the cry. A tiny, fragile, perfect cry that filled the room instantly, echoing through the walls and into the hearts of two parents who had waited and hoped and prayed. Zach and Whitney stared at their child in disbelief, tears streaming down their faces. Zach gently lifted the tiny bundle, cradling it close, and Whitney reached out, her hands trembling, to touch the soft head, to feel the warmth and life that had been growing for months within her. For a long time they simply held each other and the baby, unable to speak, letting the moment imprint itself deep into their hearts. Every worry, every sleepless night, every tear of fatigue melted away in the light of this new life. The first moments were quiet and tender. Zach whispered promises of love, protection, and joy to his child, and Whitney, through tears, whispered her own. Their voices intertwined, a gentle lullaby of gratitude and devotion. Outside, the sky had begun to darken with late afternoon clouds, yet inside, the room glowed with a warmth that came not from sunlight, but from the presence of family, love, and new beginnings. As they held their baby together, Whitney whispered softly, "Welcome to our world, little one. You are loved more than you will ever know." Zach nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, his voice trembling with emotion. "Our family is whole again. Our hearts are full." It was a quiet, sacred moment, one that would be remembered for a lifetime. The cries of the newborn, the laughter and sighs of two parents, the soft touch of tiny fingers. Everything in that room spoke of miracles, of faith, and of the profound beauty of life continuing to grow in love. That night, as Whitney and Zach sat together, holding their newest blessing, they felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been long, sometimes exhausting, often emotional, but it had led them here. Here, in the quiet warmth of their home, surrounded by love and the promise of tomorrow, the Bates family welcomed a new chapter. One more heartbeat, one more story, one more reminder that life always finds a way to surprise and bless those who open their hearts to it. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet that only comes after a day of miracles. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow through the windows, illuminating the nursery where a tiny life slept peacefully. Whitney and Zach sat side by side in the rocking chair, arms entwined, hearts overflowing. The baby's small chest rose and fell in the rhythm of life, a rhythm that had already brought so much joy, so much hope, into the world. Whitney rested her head on Zach's shoulder, eyes closed, allowing the weight of the day, the weeks, and the months behind it to wash over her. She felt tears slip down her cheeks, not of pain but of gratitude, awe, and love so vast it felt impossible to contain. Zach brushed a gentle hand over her hair, his own eyes glistening. "We did it," he whispered, voice breaking softly. "Another miracle. Another heart in our family." Whitney smiled through her tears, whispering, "It's more than I ever imagined. All these years, all these children. And yet somehow I have more love in me than I thought possible." Outside, the faint sounds of the older kids playing in the yard drifted through the open windows, their laughter carrying a harmony that reminded Whitney and Zach of why they had chosen this life. A life filled with love, chaos, faith, and family. Later, the extended Bates family arrived to meet the newest little one. Kelly, Joe, and Gil held the baby first, their eyes shining with tears, their hands gentle and reverent. Each sibling came forward in turn, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, whispering blessings and soft prayers. The room buzzed with quiet joy, an energy that filled every corner, every heart, every breath. Casey and Bradley hovered nearby, their faces full of wonder, already imagining the adventures they would share with their new sibling. The older siblings shared hugs and laughter, teasing Zach gently, but all the while their eyes glimmered with a tenderness that could only come from love so deep it spans generations. As night fell, the family gathered together in the living room. Whitney and Zach held the baby in their arms while everyone else sat close, listening to the soft coos and quiet breathing of this tiny life. They shared stories of past births, memories of sleepless nights, laughter and tears. The walls echoed with family love, a love that had grown with every challenge, every joy, and every new addition. Whitney rested her hand over the baby's chest, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath her palm. It was the same heartbeat that had called her to patience, to courage, to wonder. And now it was the heartbeat that reminded her of everything she held dear. Her husband, her children, her family, her faith. Zach whispered softly into her ear, "This is what we've been building all along. A life full of love, always growing, always giving." Whitney closed her eyes, letting the words settle deep into her soul. The room was filled with a sense of eternity, a quiet knowing that no matter what the future held, this family, this love, this miracle would endure. As the night grew deeper, everyone eventually drifted to rest, leaving Whitney and Zach in the soft glow of the nursery light. They held their child close, rocking gently, and whispered promises of love and protection. "Welcome to the family, little one," Whitney whispered. "You are so loved. You always have been, even before we met you." Zach pressed his lips to her forehead. "And you will be loved forever," he said. Outside, the stars twinkled over the Tennessee sky, a quiet witness to the miracle of life, the beauty of family, and the enduring power of love. Within the Bates home, hearts were full, souls were at peace, and a new chapter had begun, one that promised laughter, hope, and joy for generations to come. In that still, sacred night, the story of Zach and Whitney Bates, and their ever-growing family, had reached a moment of pure grace. And as they watched their child sleep, safe in their arms, they knew that life, love, and family would always find a way to bloom, over and over again. The house was quiet, yet it hummed with the invisible presence of love. Whitney cradled her newborn, the tiny life that had grown quietly inside her now resting in her arms, so fragile and perfect, yet somehow impossibly complete. Zach sat beside her, his hand over hers, his eyes never leaving their child, glistening with tears that he could no longer hold back. It was a quiet kind of magic, the kind that fills every corner of a home with warmth. Every heartbeat, every breath, every soft sigh seemed amplified. The sound of life, of love, of miracles made real. Whitney rested her cheek against the baby's head, feeling the tiny rise and fall of their chest, and in that instant time seemed to pause. She thought of the long months behind them, the moments of fatigue, the fears, the quiet prayers whispered in the dark. Every hardship, every sleepless night, every wave of uncertainty had led to this sacred moment of awe and wonder. Zach leaned closer, brushing a tear from Whitney's cheek. "Our hearts have grown again," he whispered. "And somehow, I didn't think it could get any bigger." Whitney smiled through her own tears, her voice breaking softly. "It always grows, Zach. Every child, every moment. Our love just keeps finding room for more." Outside, the night sky stretched wide and endless over the Tennessee countryside, stars glimmering like tiny promises. Inside, the Bates home was alive in silence, alive with gratitude, with awe, with the quiet joy of family made whole. Their children would sleep soon, unaware of the miracle that had arrived in their home that very day. But Whitney and Zach felt it deeply. They felt the weight and wonder of the generations behind them, the love that had carried them, and the hope that would carry this child forward. Whitney traced the tiny fingers curling around hers. Zach held the baby closer, and together, they whispered promises that were more than words. Promises of protection, devotion, faith, and endless love. This child, this newest blessing, was a reminder of all they had overcome, all they had cherished, and all the beauty yet to come. And in that quiet, sacred moment, they knew life, in all its messy, miraculous glory, always finds a way. Whitney rested her head on Zach's shoulder. He kissed the top of her hair. And together, in the glow of the nursery light, they watched their child sleep, hearts full beyond measure. No words could capture the depth of what they felt. Only the soft rhythm of tiny breaths, the warmth of arms entwined, and the unspoken understanding that family love is the greatest miracle of all. And so, under the quiet Tennessee night, with stars witnessing from above, the Bates family began this new chapter. One more heartbeat, one more story, one more reminder that love always grows, and miracles never end. The house, the family, the love, everything was complete.